Diversity, it might be what's holding your team back, and you may not know it yet and may not know how to solve it. For that reason, I'm really excited to tell you that Data Futurology has established a partnership with She Loves Data, and we're doing a series dedicated on improving diversity in your organization, in your teams, in your workplace, so you can get the most value out of your teams, out of your data, and create products that the market really wants. Tune in every week as we speak with executives and female leaders from all over the world on how they have targeted and improved the diversity in their teams, and you can find out what we can learn from them.
We are thrilled as a She Loves Data to be part of the Futurology podcast, where we will showcase some female leaders, but the leaders from tech industry, and we will be talking about strategies, about data, about biases, and about diversity. Join us.
I wanted to say a big thank you to our sponsors. One of our sponsors is Shine Solutions Group. Shine Solution Group is a technology consultancy that has been empowering their enterprise and government partners with pragmatic technology solutions for over 20 years. Learn more at shinesolutions.com. Also, a big thank you to SAS, giving you the power to know. Through innovative software and services, SAS empowers and inspires data advocates around the world to transform data into intelligence. Committed to diversity, did you know about the Women in Analytics network that they have? It's a SAS-sponsored networking program aimed to strengthen diversity in the analytics field. Check it out in the show notes below. They're definitely committed to it as they're helping us with this diversity series too. I also would like to tell you about Growing Data. Growing Data is a consultancy that helps organizations unlock the full potential of their data. They work with some of Australia's most successful organizations from finance. They work with people like ANZ Bank, through to biotechnology, companies like CSL, and all the way to construction, working with companies like Metrocon. They help these and many more companies solve their most challenging data-related problems in analytics, machine learning, data engineering, and data governance. While I was at ANZ Bank, I got the pleasure to work with the team at Growing Data, and I can tell you for a fact they are top-notch. I highly recommend Growing Data. Find out more at growingdata.com.au. Also, a big thank you to Talent Insights. Talent Insights are Australia's leading data specialist recruitment business. They are experts in recruitment strategy and delivery for analytics and data teams. They are the go-to recruitment business for all your data roles in Australia, and they can help both with permanent hires and short-term project-focused data resources. I've used Talent Insights in the past, and I've always found them fantastic to work with. Visit them at talentinsights.com.au. Hi, and welcome to Data Futurology. Thank you for joining us on another episode of our special diversity series called She Leads. We've partnered with She Loves Data for this series. We're so excited to bring you this in partnership. It's been such an interesting series of discussions across all different topics. Today, we always have a co-host from She Loves Data. Today, we have the She Loves Data co-founder, CMO of Meiro, Pavel Bulowski. Mate, how are you going today?
Great. I've been looking forward to this. The series is going really well. I've been getting great feedback, and these conversations for me are interesting. So always great to be back.
Oh, same here. I've been loving these. And today, our special guest is Disha Goenka. Disha spent about 9 or 10 years at Google, and now has spent about 6 or 7 years at Twitter. She's the marketing director for Asia Pacific. Disha, how are you doing today? Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. Thank you so much.
I wanted to kick us off by asking you about your background and your origin story. How was it that you got to where you are today? How was your journey, and did you find that you were taking different turns through your professional career? And if so, what were some of those episodes throughout your journey?
So I grew up in Southern India, and I actually come from a family of entrepreneurs. So I think my story is anything but linear. So it's totally non-linear and full of pivots. I think the reason for that is I'm endlessly curious, and I was always wanting to explore the world. So I've been very fortunate to have had career chapters with Google, for example, in India, in the US, Australia, Brazil, and now in Singapore, where I've been with Twitter for the last 6 years, as you mentioned. I think this entire experience really helped me gain a very diverse and international outlook. I never wanted to do just marketing when I started out my career. I always seeked out roles that appealed to my commercial, analytical, and also my creative side. So I spent a significant portion of my career in sales, operations, product management, and product marketing, because it helped me understand and it took me to the close to the end customer, as I would say, and also to engineers who really built the product. And this has helped me in good stead in terms of understanding the overall business. But I took a step back maybe about like 6-7 years ago in terms of figuring out where do I want to spend the rest of my career. And I realized that through the years, the roles I enjoyed most involved data and involved marketing. So creating marketing strategies and campaigns purely for customer delight at its core is my happy place. And I truly am so glad and fortunate that I've been able to build a career in this space.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And not enough people not enough people take a step back sometimes in their career to see what they really enjoy. And sometimes we get so consumed in the execution and doing a really good work on a day-to-day basis that taking that step back and that broader view is I think a key part of designing the career that you love and having the life that you want. So that's amazing that you did that and that it's taking you where you are today. No, incredible.
Absolutely.
Disha, I'm curious here. Kind of your entire career, as far as I can tell, kind of evolves around marketing. But you covered multiple disciplines. But I think the businesses that you work for are very focused on marketing. So I'm kind of curious how do you see someone embarking on that career, whether that's more data-oriented role or more marketing-oriented role in 2021? Where should people focus on? Like, what's the skill set to build? Because I think even in our lifetime in this business, we have seen dramatic shift. And I'm sort of curious, what do you consider like a future-proof skill set for a future CMO or sort of a marketing manager, director type of specialty?
See, I pride myself at being a fast learner. If I have to give an advice to even myself or anyone who's embarking on this journey, I would say that marketing and technology world and the tech industry is moving at a dramatic pace. And it's honestly moving at a pace faster than any of us ever predicted. So keeping ourselves really up to date, I would say requires structured learning and working. And even today, I feel like whether you're a CMO today or you're a marketing manager, you have to make sure that there's a disciplined effort in learning the new tech that is coming as we move along. And that is the one thing that will be critical for marketing professionals to succeed going forward. The other, I would say, advice I would give for any young marketing professionals who are studying for marketing right now is looking back at my experience, I do feel like spending some time in sales to try and understand the end customer and figuring out what do they really care about. And also on the product side to understand how engineering, for example, makes product decisions. I truly believe it makes you a better marketer. And whether you can do that through rotation programs or even maybe spend a year or two in these roles, I feel is, again, going to be super critical from understanding the business as a whole.
That's amazing.
Essentially, it's the broadness of the experience, not just the actual, you become a
Absolutely.
good marketer by not being just marketers, what you're saying.
Correct.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Interesting.
And I love that advice because it's definitely widely applicable. And in fact, when I speak to data scientists that are looking to broaden their horizons, sales skills is one of the top things that I mentioned that they should consider, and definitely a role either in sales or working closely with sales definitely opens up their mind into the commercial possibilities of that particular skill set. And that's so interesting to hear that in marketing you have the same view. As a continuation of that, I wanted to ask you about the next stage, or what's coming up for CMOs in your views in the next couple of years, in terms of there's obviously a lot of market shifts, a lot of increasing change due to changes in digital technology. What do you see as the most important attributes for CMOs in the digital age, and I guess with all the changes that's coming in the next couple of years?
I would actually probably look at four things. The first one is left and right brain balance. And I don't think a lot of people talk about it enough. Especially in a data-driven world, I think we are now used to, most of the conversation is around MarTech. What technology stacks are we looking at? How do we actually get better at using data? But which is again, like super important, but I do feel that CMOs need to be both analytical and of course, creative. And I feel like exceptionally successful CMOs who are on the bleeding edge of technology deeply first understand the questions that they're trying to answer, can work with data to figure out how to answer it, and most importantly, how do they use that information and data to bring it to life in a way that is truly emotive and human. So I think the left and right brain balance is something that cannot be understated and I don't see it going away irrespective of how much AI and ML comes into the world. The second part I would say is agility. And I think this is something that might sound cliche, but I do feel like marketing needs to be more and more agile as technology starts getting more and more complicated as well. I think in a world where customer attention is the currency, personalization using tech and data is absolutely critical to ensure that marketing is agile, so it can be hyper relevant, and also so that we can use it in the right time with the right content and also, of course, the right channel. The third thing I would say is around customer centricity and 360-degree customer centricity. Now, this is important for any business and, of course, from a function perspective for marketing for sure. But I think it's never been more important to build brands with a clear purpose that aligns with your customers' values. And if you look at consumers today and compare them to, say, like 10 years ago, I think there's been a marked shift in consumer behavior as well. So it's extremely important that we understand our customers a lot better to ensure that marketing and everything in terms of communication is completely aligned with values there. The last one I would say, which sounds pretty simple, is being human. I come from B2B marketing, and B2B marketing is, I would say even like 5 or 10 years ago, people used to talk about like one-sheeters and PDFs and what does it look like, like that's what B2B marketing is. It's so dry. I think that has changed and it needs to change. I think marketing at the most foundational first principle level needs to be human. Whether it's B2B or B2C, it's the only way to develop and sustain a company's approach to business.
It's really fascinating how many different approaches you can have. And I would have seen kind of CMOs who are that one side driven, who are hugely creative, who are all about brand. Then I would have seen others who are performance oriented. They don't care about annoying the customers who are never going to buy from them because they care about technical things like cost per acquisitions, and it's very, very detached from any type of consumer experience. So I think there's a huge spectrum, and also at least what we see in my home market in Southeast Asia is like you have huge differences in maturity with what the big MNCs are bringing in technologically, culturally, professionally, and how local companies, for example, behave. It's typically super spread in terms of maturity. So that's a really an interesting point with that left and right brain. I think I'm curious. Let's zoom in on the technology piece a little bit, and I think that's a selfish question because that's my background, right?
Yeah.
So we've discussed this in a couple of episodes before already. How do you think the CMOs are particularly adapting to that change in technology adoption? Because we see there's stats coming out that in some non-infrastructure heavy companies, CMOs have bigger technological budgets than IT at some point. So they are inevitably getting into a very different field, being in data management, security, and things that are not necessarily native to the sort of the creative brain. So I'm curious how you see that, and especially with your experience working at tech companies, essentially. So.
See, I think marketing, is definitely one of the most technology-dependent functions in business today. I think, as you rightly said, the increased use of first-party data, the growing privacy regulations around it, new approaches to data governance, all of this wasn't part of a modern CMO's life even 5 years ago, right? So it's definitely critical, which I mentioned earlier, to stay on top of the discipline around MarTech today. But again, going back to what I mentioned, one should not forget that successful marketing is equal parts art and science. While the data can be used for better targeting, segmentation, analytics, and but this mountain of data is only as good as its appeal to different human behaviors and emotions. In my opinion, standout marketing is a combination of a solid brief, genius data analysis, whether it's using a stack or it's using otherwise, and brilliant personalized content. And CMOs today understand it. And they also understand that, again, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach where you can only, for example, have a creative approach to brand marketing and not really think about the bottom of the funnel kind of marketing, which is more performance. So I think it needs to be more holistic. And I don't feel like you can also just do the performance using tech, marketing technologist kind of marketing and forget about the other side as well.
That is great. And I guess a related question with the increase in dependency on data and data analysis that is sweeping through so many industries, and definitely in the case of marketing, as you mentioned, it is so important. In organizations, sometimes it comes to a point of making decisions of ownership of the data and of the technologies, and there's always a bit of a debate on who should drive those initiatives within the organizations, whether it should be centralized to kind of like a chief data science or chief data officer roles, or whether it should be spread out through the business so it can be better linked and better targeted to what the business needs. What are your views on who should be custodian of the data, of the technologies, and what is the role of CMOs within that?
So I think the way I see it, it's important to draw a distinction between data keepers, as you call it, or data storage, and the interpretation of data, which I primarily believe sits in marketing. I do think that a CMO and CDO need to fully understand what IT has to offer, for example. And IT may not understand how to accurately translate marketing requirements into technical capabilities. So I think the relationship between these two teams is quite symbiotic, and it needs to be not just at an executive level where the CMO and CDO are talking about it, but it's not actually funneling down. Because it's critical to ensure that there are no knowledge gaps between the teams in practice. So it can help the data and technology team inspire, for example, what's desirable from a marketing perspective and vice versa as well.
That makes sense. That's really good.
Interesting. So I think let's have a look at another aspect of this, which I think is something we want to discuss also as a talent. So if we kind of look at it from the earlier question was kind of what advice would you be giving yourself or someone in the role of kind of aspiring kind of marketing leader a few years back. I'm curious, what do you look for in specifically now when you are building teams and growing teams? What type of aspects are you looking for in people? And I think where I'm going with this question is that I think as a business is when we hire for this super fast changing and developing world, I don't think we kind of skill set and experience wise we can really rely on the traditional educational system, because it simply doesn't catch up with the dynamic changes in the in the industry, in any industry, essentially. So, what is it that you look for in people? What are the aspects? And I think especially I would love to kind of hear that relation to that left to right brain that you described, because I think that's a really curious point you made before.
Absolutely. So I think I'll break the question into two parts. I'll first talk about what are the things I personally value when I'm hiring and building teams. And then second part, I can probably touch a little bit upon the kind of roles we're looking at in teams today. So the first part, and this is something that I think I've maintained through my career and I really personally value, and I feel like it should go beyond marketing as well. So the first one is diversity in background within a team. I think, individuals who hail from different backgrounds naturally obviously come with their own worldviews because of their unique experiences. And this is absolutely critical if the teams have to explore creative ways of problem solving and decision making. And I've seen it time again in the way that I've built teams and the way we make decisions, that this really helps build a stronger team. And I also feel like it is the best way to come up with creative and innovative ideas. The second one, which I would say is a little bit more harder to, I guess, quantify, but I really believe in will before skill. And I'll tell you why. I strongly believe, because of the way the industry is changing around us, whether it's on the tech side or otherwise, organizations need athletes. They need athletes who are highly adaptable and motivated to bring their best selves to work. And this can only happen consistently if one has great attitude. So these are the two things I would say from a talent perspective that I really value. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that when people are wanting to put in the work and they have the right attitude and they have a passion for what they're chasing, which is what you beautifully summarize as the will. People are unstoppable, and I completely agree that the diversity is key in a team, and bringing people from these diverse backgrounds. It takes, in my experience, it takes a higher recruitment effort to be able to reach widely, to be able to attract a diverse group of people. I think it's much easier to go to sort of one pool of people where it's very homogeneous, and you can get a lot of people sometimes maybe quickly, but they're all very, very similar. So going broad in order to create that diversity of background and of thought and experience is much harder. You do have to come in with an open mind, and at least I find that you gotta ask and give permission to your teams and your peers to challenge you on that. And sometimes the lack of diversity comes in age, for example.
Absolutely.
I found myself sometimes building a new team, and sometimes there's a lot of young people, and I had one of the managers in my team, and he said to me, he's like, we need people who are not everyone has to be younger than us, right? We need to think broadly. So no, I could not agree more. I think that is fantastic. I wanted to ask you, and I think this is the maybe obligatory question of 2020 about COVID, and I wanted to ask you about changes or shifts that you've noticed, either in markets, in customers, and employees, shifts that you've noticed during this period, and if there's anything that you can share about how at Twitter there's been any adaptations to these challenges as the year has progressed.
No, I think it's absolutely a very important question, because I do believe that there are a lot of learnings from 2020 as well. So I break it down again into two parts. The first part is, let's look at employees. I think Twitter was one of the first companies to go to a work from home model in the face of COVID-19 early March this year. And I think we were quite uniquely positioned to respond quickly as well, because we have been giving emphasis on decentralization and supporting a distributed workforce way before 2020. So I think that enabled us to respond faster. I think, as with everyone else globally as well, I'm sure the two of you can attest to this. Work routines have definitely changed. And they've changed across the board, irrespective of levels, irrespective of backgrounds. We've seen people adapt to COVID-19 and working from home in various ways. So we've had to pivot as well, right from the way we hire, where I think before, for critical decisions, and especially for the last interview stages, we had to fly people to meet their hiring managers, for example. The way we onboard, I personally have onboarded 3 to 4 people during COVID-19, and the experience has been vastly different from how we would do it in person. And that's also been a learning experience. The way we manage our teams, I think remote managing, we had to come up with a playbook on how do we upskill managers to remote manage, because this is not something that everyone is, familiar with. But I think above all else, and this is probably what makes me quite proud of the company as well, is we prioritized employee health over everything else. And at the very get-go back in March, we said we have to support everybody at every level, whether it's physical health, whether it's emotional health or mental health. So one initiative in this direction, for example, is like we suspended performance ratings for the year, just to make sure that as hard as everyone is working and as stressed as everyone is, we need people to prioritize their own health and mental well-being over everything else. I think it was a very bold and a very courageous decision from a company's perspective, but I do feel like employee satisfaction and the way teams have responded to this could not have been better. I think it really shows in the kind of productivity, in the kind of business we've been running in 2020, that trust in the company to do that really helped the company overall. The second bit, I would say, which is probably more to do with the discipline of marketing and consumer behavior, I think come March of this year, or actually even like in January, because COVID kind of broke out in China way before everywhere else. It was an interesting point, I think, in all marketers' life, where we kind of had to rethink our whole marketing calendar that took months to prepare, right, in 2019 for 2020. The world kind of shifted around us, and it's been a defining moment for everybody. And this was truly reflected in consumer behavior. Now, what we did, which I think is super interesting, is to look at some of the changes. We looked at millions of conversations around what kind of behaviors have emerged during this time and what kind of behaviors have accelerated. And some of the findings, I think, are intuitive, but it was great to have data to support it, is importance of closer communities. People started talking about how important it is to have communities around them, even if they weren't able to meet family, wherever they are. How can we actually get closer to family? If you used to call your mom and dad once a week, you started calling them every day, for example. So things like that. And of course, there were, and I'm sure you guys have seen it as well, innovative ways of embracing lockdown. I think sourdough baking was a rage for a long time in COVID-19. And then, of course, I think people kind of went back and thought about their hobbies, which I think hasn't happened in a long time. Like people were so busy working and commuting to work. Nobody really thought about what do I want to do in my free time? So I think creativity kind of got unleashed. Some people picked up new hobbies. Some people went back to hobbies they loved when they were younger. And the last one, which I think I'm sure you both agree with as well, is what I call like the rise of the other epidemic, which is mental health, with people being confined. And so there was a lot of conversation around this as well. Positive as well, because people started talking more about it, which is good because awareness is good. So what we did is we looked at all of this data, and we've been very open and collaborative in sharing this data with brands to really help them understand the do's and don'ts, and provided them kind of a playbook on how do you actually reach out to consumers during this time with empathy and with strength. Because I think a lot of the brands were very apprehensive about how do I reach out? Is this the right time to market? So I think this really helped a lot of the brands and CMOs that I work with as well, really kind of understand in a very simple way, what is the right thing to do? And I think the other bit around marketing, which is I'm sure true with everybody, is on the B2B side, we've been very heavy on the physical events. So we've had to get quite innovative in terms of virtual events. And again, how do you stand out in a very cluttered virtual event environment? Because everyone is doing a webinar, for example. So what makes your webinar different, right? So that's been an interesting challenge. And then lastly, I feel like 2020 has definitely shown the power of content marketing, and it's never been more important than before. And I think it just kind of was accelerated and accentuated in 2020.
Amazing. And did you pick up any new hobbies or skills during this time? I've started surfing. I'm terrible, but but it was a new one for me. How are you?
I actually went back to two things that I used to love. One is playing tennis, which I just kind of stopped.
Great.
So I think tennis was one of them. And then the other one, actually, I don't even want to call it a hobby because I think it's a life skill, is reading. I just wasn't reading enough. And I think I made time for reading during COVID-19. It kind of became my escape from work, which I hope to continue going into next year as well.
Amazing. How about you, Pavel?
That's really interesting. I've been actually thinking about reading a lot. I do think I read quite a bit. I do publish my reading list every year, kind of around January 1st, and I've made it a habit for the last 5 years, and it's everywhere on my any social platform. So I do it purely selfishly because what I get back in response to that is a lot of tips for more books. So I don't have to do that much of a research. But honestly, I haven't read nearly not even anywhere close to 50% of what I read in any normal year this year, and I don't know why. I do have the time, clearly, but I just don't understand why. I can't get into the books. I don't have so much focus. I guess it's part of it is because I've been always a heavy consumer of audiobooks, especially when I travel. So that's gone. But it's just that focus, and I can't be on another screen. I've had these ambitions of getting on all of these online courses and everything, and it's just like I can't stand the idea of being on a screen another hour at night. It's just too much during the day. So I'm desperately trying to do kind of something offline. And my big goal is actually to be 2 hours off screen a day, and that's in a lockdown where you can't really leave house. That's a very, very challenging. So that's been tricky, to be honest.
It's actually very interesting you said that, because I think I was having this conversation with a few of my friends, and they basically, people who were not reading before the lockdown, I feel like they kind of picked it up during 2020. But people who were reading a lot, actually it's dropped. And the correlation actually is exactly what you mentioned. Most people were reading, whether it's a Kindle or an audiobook, during commute time. And because the commute time's taken away, because they used to find that focus time just for themselves to read. And now when they're home, there's a lot more going on. There's some distractions, etc. They're just not getting that focus time anymore. So it's really interesting to see that you feel the same as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting time for sure. I mean, this year I don't think I've ever learned as much as I have this year. But I have to say it's not been easy, and I think this is something that we should also be generally a little bit more okay with saying out in public that it's not easy. It's just some people make it sound like it is, but it is. It's not really.
No, it's definitely it's anything but easy.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned in one of the previous questions was changing consumer behavior, and obviously dramatically induced by the pandemic. And kind of stepping aside from that, one of the trends that we also observe is that especially in the sort of the, I don't want to say bundle it as millennials, but in the sort of the younger generation of consumers and population generally, especially in the I would say in the more sort of mature, saturated and developed markets, that we see that is sort of a desire for like a purpose or mission-driven brands. And I think I would like to hear your perspective on that as from Twitter, that has obviously been always having a very specific and strong voice, and also from maybe perspective of your kind of advertisers, because I think tech companies like Twitter are, for a lot of people who are maybe in banking and finance, not necessarily such a relatable experience as what you do is just a bit different here. So curious how you think about that.
I definitely think that the approach to brand as a mission really depends on like you rightly said, the vertical and the industry, the companies and the maturity of the company, and also like culturally as well, where the brand sits. But I firmly believe that successful brands lead with purpose. And I really think it's not just lip service, but it's proven by data, by many, many actually studies that we've seen. I think we did a recent study at Twitter with Five-Fish, the Numbers Lab, and 82% of respondents said that brands should use their position to affect positive change in society. So we always talk about this with advertisers that we work with as well. And I think a lot of the times people ask the question you just asked me, like, how do we go about figuring out this very, very important answer? Now, there isn't really a simple playbook, et cetera. I think it really involves a lot of work from a company's perspective to understand what is the mission they're trying to drive. But if I have to simplify it, I think I will probably put it in like 3 Ps, maybe. So the first one is, I would say, purpose. What is it that actually guides your brand? The second one is people, or, like your customers, even your teams for that matter. How are you supporting those most impacted by anything? And lastly, I would say the pledge. How do you plan on actually giving back? It's a very simple structure, but it's very thought-provoking as well when we've had these discussions with brands. And I think what's been interesting is, irrespective of whether it's a bank, in fact, if you look at some of the banks in Singapore, a lot of them, I think the Hong Kong Bank is one of them, who has a very strong biodiversity purpose as a brand. So I think it really depends on what is it that guides the values of your company to come up with this answer. At Twitter, I think, like you rightly said, we're committed in our mission to serve the public conversation. And we do this by democratizing speech globally, making sure that voices of like all communities are always heard. We amplify perspectives on both sides, and we give them a table in terms of the platform and a mic and a stage for all the issues that matter to them. Now, this is not something that's reflective just from a company mandate perspective. It's reflected in the kind of marketing campaigns we do. Leslie, who is our global CMO, always says that we have to have the consumer voice, and in our case, it's tweets, front and center of our marketing campaigns, showing the real and raw conversations on the platform in the most authentic and credible way. You guys probably have seen some of the recent examples we've done, like, for example, the Black Lives Matter conversation that happened in the US. We recently did another one around wearing a mask. And I think all of this front and center, what you see, is not a slogan that Twitter wants to drive, but it's basically trying to elevate voices on what the people want. And I think having such a strong mission as a brand is something that then fuels down not just to your employees, it's also something that the consumers then align with, and it has a ripple effect across the board.
And do you think it's inevitable for survival of brands to have a strong mission like that, or do you think there's still a room for brands that are, I guess, more commodity transactional type? How do you look at that across the board?
I don't think I'll make a blanket statement and say that, if you don't have purpose as a company, you will not be successful, because that's not true as well. But I think in order to be a company that is, if you do have the ambition to scale your brand a certain way, and if you have the ambition for consistent and longevity, looking at consumer behavior and the way, whether it's millennials or otherwise what people want, I do think it's important, whether you're a small SMB, mom and pop, or you're a big Fortune 500, to have a purpose as a brand. And I've seen that in Singapore as well. And in Singapore, a lot of, for example, mom and pop stores, including like baking companies and like bakeries, et cetera, have really mushroomed during COVID. Mm-hmm. And there are a few of them who've really stood out, because the reason they stood out is they were marketing during COVID, talking about supporting the migrant community in Singapore. And this is a small mom and pop shop, but they understood the nuance of marketing during COVID-19. What is it that people care about? They all have really small margins, but in their small way, however they're able to contribute, they did talk about that. So I don't think it's completely impossible for a small company to come up with a mission overnight. I think it does take time, but I do think it's important.
That's really great. Yeah, I agree, especially in a noisy marketplace, being authentic and sharing what you actually care about is one of the ways to stand out. So sharing your purpose definitely helps provide more visibility and find your tribe, find people who
Absolutely.
and enjoy the same things. One of the other things I wanted to ask you about was around diversity initiatives. Before we touched on that to get a diverse workforce in terms from a recruitment perspective, it's definitely more effort, but definitely worthwhile. And then, so this is more around how do we foster that diversity once the people are in the company, and how do we support them and make sure that we celebrate the diversity that we have, and we allow it to foster within the company. Do you have any diversity initiatives that you could share with us? Any examples or stories about what you guys have done in your time?
So at Twitter, I think we're on a journey to becoming one of the most world's inclusive and diverse tech companies. And I think we're headed in the right direction. But don't get me wrong, we have a lot of work to do. And I guess progress can never be fast enough. I think the first thing is we're radically transparent so we can be held accountable on our representation targets. So we remain steadfast in our efforts towards achieving, for example, a vision for 2025, which is not that far away, that our global workforce will be at least 50% women.
Nice.
And then when it comes to execution and implementation, I completely agree with you, because I feel like people also need to understand that diversity is not something, a metric that is just to be strived for. It's an integral part of a successful business. And there are many studies that show how diverse teams, et cetera, lead to innovation and higher revenues, et cetera. How we do it is we foster the conversation from managers to employee resource groups. What I mean by employee resource groups is we have multiple employee resource groups that are dedicated to various diversity and inclusion teams. To give you an example, for example, we have a Twitter women group that's all to do with women leadership programs for them. We also have one for the Black community, which is called Blackbirds. We have one for Twitter called Twitter Able, which is for the abled, for differently abled people in the organization. Of course, we also have one for the Latinx community. We have one for the LGBTQ community. So we have various such groups formed in the organization. It is an OKR of the company to make sure that every single employee at Twitter is either a member of this group, any of these groups, if they align with it, or they are an ally. And this is something that we track, and as managers, we really care about. So that is one. I think we spoke about hiring earlier, but I think how do you then make sure that diverse teams and thrive once they join the organization? Yes. I think one of the things that we're working on is a very fair and transparent talent planning process. And this is something that I say is a work in progress, but making sure that talent planning and everything around promotions, for example, and who we actually, when we look at bench for teams, et cetera, it's completely radical, it's completely transparent, and we make sure that the right conversations are had. On the marketing side, an interesting thing we've started last year, which I'm super proud of actually, is supplier inclusion and diversity. Now, this is not something that I've seen in many organizations, but we want to make sure that from a marketing perspective, we are working with as many diverse owned businesses as possible. So we've changed our sourcing and procurement processes in a way that we track and measure our relationships with diverse suppliers. And we're also always looking to build relationships with companies that give us access to new ones.
That is incredible. And I particularly love the idea of having, did you call it delegates? When people affiliate themselves to a community and help. Ally. I love the idea of the ally. Oh, I think that's yeah, definitely one that I personally hadn't heard, and I love it. And I love because then that gives you permission to celebrate the diversity of other people in a way that's really inclusive. I love it.
Yeah, but I think also in order to really be successful, this has to be a long-term effort that's encoded into the DNA of the business and its vision. So I think that's like really tying up the conversation we had today together really, really nicely. I'm curious if you could maybe be willing to share a bit of an advice. One of the things I've seen, and as we work dominantly with marketers and in the technology space with my company, with Meiro, and one of the things we are seeing for sure is that there is, let's say, there are changes to their budgets in this year, and kind of investments into strategic projects, and it's been kind of frozen, it's been halted, it's been halved, and obviously marketing budget is always the first thing to go, as we know in the business, because that's what you can usually spare without seemingly without feeling it on the company future, even though there's multiple studies that the companies that continue to invest throughout any crisis actually make it out of it in a better position than when they went into it. So it's an interesting thing. But I'm curious what would be your advice to CMOs, to marketing leaders, to kind of apply and take to action on how can they do more with less, essentially, in the time of sort of a downturn like we have right now.
I would say two things, Pavel. I think the first one is leading by listening and with agility and empathy. And this is both your teams internally and also the customers you want to communicate to is absolutely critical. The second thing I'll say is I think it's increasingly important for marketers to connect their campaigns to business outcomes and not just marketing measurements, which is to do with your CPAs and your impressions, et cetera. I think this is especially important in a time when many businesses are facing great financial strain.
So focusing on essentially an ROI and connectedness to the balance sheet of the business even more. So we're not producing pretty pictures, but things that actually work. Yeah, I think more scrutiny on that can be used even in the normal times, and even more so in the times like this, which are difficult, admittedly, for a lot of businesses. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is great. And as a follow-up question, I wanted to ask you about the that sometimes in a customer journey you need to be exposed to a message or a brand multiple times before sort of pulling the trigger on a purchase decision. And is that maybe also a pitfall that sometimes people can fall into a trap of maybe thinking too short term in terms of saying, if I'm not getting a sale through this particular interaction, then it may not be worth it in the long term. How do you think people can balance the short term gains with the longer term benefits that multiple exposures could bring?
So I think, Felipe, we probably need another hour to talk about attribution marketing. But
I love that, actually. I think that's fair too.
But I think, I don't really feel like that's really changed, be it 2020 or not. I do feel like the stickiness, especially when it comes to messaging, you do need to use multiple channels and multiple frequencies to make sure that the message actually sticks. And I think this is just going back to the marketing playbook of making sure that your campaign and the messaging aligned with it actually flows across the funnel. I recently heard this term, which I'm not even sure if it's a lexicon that we use overall, but you guys can tell me. Have you guys heard of brandformance?
No.
Yeah,
no.
So somebody has basically come up with a concept which is called branding and performance and kind of mixed it, but talks about the importance of branding purely in terms of how it can have a supercharged effect on performance and what that looks like across the customer journey lifecycle. So it is, I feel like long-term is definitely good. I think my teams and I talk about this a lot, especially when it comes to new messaging and new value propositions. Your brand message needs to be in market at least 6 months before the customer actually kind of digests this is what this company stands for. If you're in the game of quick installs, let's, for example, take a gaming company for that matter. But more and more, when I'm speaking to marketers, the conversation is about lifetime value. It's not about that first app download only. So I think it really is something that I think most marketers now are getting better. It's going back to my comment earlier. Looking at marketing measurements, looking at, okay, I got a CPA of $1 and I had 20,000 downloads. So that's a tick. I think it's much more than that. And marketers are now looking at, okay, even if this particular platform is more expensive, but if my lifetime value is higher, then I should be investing more here. So that's an example of the way how you would approach it.
Amazing. And I was just going to say that answer, much like the rest of the conversation, really shows the level of broad visibility that you have, Disha, across multiple industries. It's really, really impressive. Sorry, Pavel, I interrupted you.
I know it's it's an interesting comment to make, but I think also what's happening at the same time is that the dynamic is that the whole field is expanding, and you have multiple entities, and then you have the walled gardens of advertising where you can't really, and a task like attribution in marketing has been something that's been there since I started here. Like that's been the discussion, and I don't think it's ever going to go away. And I think it's purely because you would no longer, you don't have one way to contact a company and close a business, whether that's a B2C or B2B. It's always multi-platform, and factor everything in is just a very, very hard, not just a data, but a scientific sort of effort.
Absolutely.
And I think there has to be a combination for marketers, and I see that on a small scale at even at business like ours. When I look at sort of when I have my marketing hat on, is yes, we can look at the performance metrics on our search campaigns and display ads and programmatic that we are running, but at the same time, I have to be very comfortable with knowing that I can't map everything and every single thing, because you can't map a conversation that happens in an office from someone who has seen our ad, recommended something to your colleague, and they contacted you to an organic channel. So I think there has to be equal parts of very, very sort of a bird's eye view on the entire business and the entire organization, and as well as kind of close oversight of individual platforms and looking at how they work. But it has to all work ultimately together. You have to meet somewhere in the middle. I think that's super important, because the world in any way is getting a lot more complex, and advertising especially.
I could not agree more. I have to announce, unfortunately, we are out of time. Obviously, this is such an interesting discussion. We could definitely keep going, but I am going to be respectful of everyone's time. And Disha, I want to thank you so much for the time that you spent with us today, sharing your perspectives, your knowledge, your background, your experience. It's been extremely, extremely enlightening. So thank you so much for that. And Pavel, always a pleasure. I've been loving this diversity series that we've embarked on together, and I can't believe this is episode 11. It's been so much fun, and thank you both so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Felipe and Pavel. I think it's been an absolute honor to speak to you guys, and really fun. I mean, we should do it again.